Hey guys, I honestly never imagined myself posting something like this online, but here goes nothing. Growing up, my life was simple, just me and my dad in a small house on the edge of town. We weren't rich, but honestly, it never mattered. Dad made everything feel special. I still remember Saturdays, building those little model airplanes together, eating way too much microwave popcorn, and watching old sci-fi movies until midnight. He'd always chuckle when I got glue all over my fingers, shaking his head gently, saying, "Austin, someday you'll build something amazing. I just know it." I didn't believe him then, but it felt good hearing him say it. Then, one day, everything changed. Dad had a heart attack while I was at school, no warnings, no goodbyes, nothing. I came home expecting him to tease me about my messy handwriting on homework, only to find our neighbor standing awkwardly in the doorway, eyes red and swollen, trying to explain why Dad wasn't coming home. It felt like someone had ripped the ground from under me. But I told myself, at least I still have Mom. We'd get through this together, or at least, that's what I thought. Not even 6 months passed before Rick showed up. Loud, arrogant, and always trying to dominate every conversation. He was everything my dad wasn't. And with Rick came his daughter Macy, just a year older than me, but acting like she ruled the world. My mom barely seemed like herself anymore, always deferring to Rick, laughing nervously at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. Before I knew it, they moved into our house. My house. I remember the day vividly. I walked in from school, dropping my backpack by the door, and saw Macy in my room, peeling down my posters. What are you doing?" I asked, heart pounding a little faster. She looked over her shoulder, smirking. "Dad said I need more space, so guess this room is mine now." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Did you ask Mom?" Macy just shrugged, turning her back to me. She said it's fine. Later, I found my stuff crammed in boxes in the garage. No one even bothered to ask how I felt. It was the first sign that I didn't matter anymore. Things escalated quickly from there. Macy took whatever she wanted, my bike, my games, even my dad's old books. Rick backed her every single time, always finding a way to blame me. "Austin, Macy deserves this," he'd sneer. "She's more responsible, older. Maybe if you tried harder." My mom always stood silent, eyes glued to the floor, never once defending me. But nothing compared to what happened next. After months of Macy's small lies, blaming me for lost homework, broken dishes, she finally went too far. One afternoon, after I'd aced a math test for the first time, Macy stopped me on my way home. She smiled sweetly, too sweetly, and asked, "Hey, can I borrow your backpack? Mine broke." I hesitated, suspicious. But I knew Rick would twist it into me being selfish if I refused. Reluctantly, I handed it over. Next morning, I was called into the principal's office. Macy was already there, crying crocodile tears. The principal showed me stolen test papers they'd found in my bag. I didn't do this," I stammered, throat tightening. Macy sobbed louder. I tried to stop him. He wouldn't listen. The principal shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Austin. You're expelled." Mom picked me up from school, her face blank, avoiding eye contact. Rick was waiting in the car, exploding the second I climbed in. "You embarrassed us. You're a disgrace," he shouted, veins popping in his neck. "Mom, please," I begged quietly, looking desperately at her, but she stared silently out the window. At home, Rick turned to me coldly. "Pack your stuff. You're not welcome here anymore." I froze, heart racing. "Mom." She glanced up briefly, tears in her eyes, then looked away. That night, holding nothing but a garbage bag of clothes, I walked out. My mother never said a single word. I ended up at a bus stop, shivering, watching cars pass by, wondering what I'd done wrong. Just as I felt completely invisible, I heard a voice behind me. "Austin? That you, kid?" I turned slowly, recognizing that voice immediately. It was Grandpa, my mom's dad, the man she'd barely let me see after marrying Rick. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his face soft and worried. "Come on, Austin," he said gently, draping his warm jacket over my shoulders. "Let's get you home." Home. It had been a long time since that word meant anything. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change my entire life, and it was only just beginning. Living with Grandpa was like stepping into another universe. His place wasn't fancy, a small house that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, filled with books, vintage radios, and half-finished projects scattered everywhere. But it felt safe. The first few days, Grandpa didn't push me to talk. He'd just quietly set down plates of scrambled eggs or grilled cheese sandwiches, watching me carefully but never asking questions. I think he knew I needed time. One afternoon, as I sat staring blankly at my phone, still no messages from Mom, Grandpa wandered over with an old, dusty laptop under his arm. "Hey, Austin," he said, setting it down in front of me with a gentle thump. "This old thing stopped working years ago. Thought you might take a look at it. Keep yourself busy, you know." I hesitated, then reached out, touching the faded stickers that covered the top. It reminded me of Dad's workshop, the way we'd sit quietly, fixing things, sharing comfortable silence. I felt a small twist inside, nostalgia and sadness mingling together. "Sure," I finally muttered. "I'll take a look." Hours passed quickly as I worked. For the first time since I'd left Mom's place, my mind felt clear, focused. Eventually, after messing around with wires and replacing the battery, I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, and I couldn't help smiling. A real, genuine smile. Grandpa walked by just then, pausing to look over my shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned," he chuckled softly. "You fixed it. You're good at this stuff, just like your dad." Hearing that made my throat feel tight. Grandpa placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, squeezing slightly. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. The pride in his eyes was enough. Days turned into weeks, and I dove headfirst into learning design and coding. I'd remembered Dad introducing me to 3D software as a kid, showing me how blueprints worked, how every little detail mattered. Now, in Grandpa's cozy, cluttered house, I rediscovered that passion. One evening, Grandpa came home from visiting neighbors, tossing an envelope onto the kitchen table. I glanced up, curious. "Open it," he said with a sly grin, sipping his coffee. Confused, I picked it up, pulling out 2 crisp $20 bills. "What's this for?" I asked, eyebrows furrowing. "Mrs. Henderson's laptop," he explained casually. "She was complaining about it freezing again, so I mentioned you could fix things. Consider it your first paying job." I stared at the money, chest swelling with pride. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in ages, someone believed in me. It felt amazing. Meanwhile, my mom stayed quiet. Occasionally she'd send vague texts like, "Hope you're okay," but never addressed what happened or said she was sorry. Each message felt hollow, like she was checking off some imaginary list of parental duties. Macy, however, couldn't resist twisting the knife. Every few months, I'd get random messages bragging about vacations, gifts from Rick, or how great their lives were without me. I knew she wanted a reaction, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. When I turned 18, I'd saved enough to move into my own tiny apartment. It was cramped, barely bigger than a closet, but I loved every inch of it, because it was mine. Grandpa helped me move in, smiling proudly, though I could see the quiet sadness in his eyes as he left me standing alone in my new home. One evening, Grandpa called, his voice tense. "Austin, did you hear about your mom?" My gut twisted slightly. "No. What happened?" "Rick's in trouble, embezzlement or something," he sighed heavily. "They lost the house. Macy dropped out of school. They're in a real mess." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me thought I'd feel a twisted satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. Then, 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "Hey Austin, can we talk?" I stared at the screen, chest tight. Slowly, I typed back. "What do you want?" Minutes passed before her reply arrived. "We're struggling right now. Rick left, Macy's a mess. I saw how well your business is doing. Maybe you could help? We're family." I nearly laughed. "Family?" My fingers trembled slightly as I replied. "Family meant something when Rick kicked me out, and you said nothing. You chose them. Don't text me again." I blocked her number immediately, my hands shaking. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I thought of Dad, of everything he'd taught me about family, loyalty, and kindness. He'd never have abandoned me. He would have fought for me. But my mom didn't. I felt sadness, bitterness, anger, but most of all, I felt free. Because I finally realized family wasn't about blood. It was about the people who chose to stand by you, even at your worst. And now, for the first time since I lost Dad, I finally knew who my family really was. Life settled into a steady rhythm after cutting ties with my mom. For the first time, my days felt calm, predictable, safe. I had clients who trusted me, a small studio space downtown, and Grandpa's unwavering support whenever things got tough. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Then, one lazy Sunday evening, my phone buzzed. I glanced down casually and felt my stomach tighten instantly. Macy had just followed me on Instagram. I hesitated, finger hovering above the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on her profile, immediately regretting it. Her feed was exactly as I'd imagined: flashy cars, vacations she obviously couldn't afford, captions dripping with fake positivity about success and hustle. Classic Macy. But as I scrolled down further, something else caught my eye: designs she'd recently uploaded. My designs. My heart pounded hard against my ribs as I stared at them. She hadn't even bothered to hide it, just altered a few colors, cropped a few edges, and slapped her name across the top. Anger flared hot inside me. Without thinking, I shot her a message: "Macy, remove my designs from your page now." She responded almost immediately, clearly unbothered. "LOL. No clue what you're talking about, Austin. Jealous much?" My jaw clenched. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Fine," I typed, heart pounding. "You asked for it." Within the hour, I'd compiled timestamps, original drafts, and emails from clients, solid proof. I sent everything to Instagram's copyright team. Within days, her post vanished, and Macy's profile was flagged. I thought that was the end of it, until Bryce, her latest boyfriend, messaged me later that night. "Hey bro, think you misunderstood Macy. No need for drama, right?" I stared at his message, shaking my head. I typed back, "She stole my work and lied about it. Stay out of it." He didn't reply again. A week later, 2 police officers knocked on my apartment door. My heart sped up as I opened it. "Are you Austin Hayes?" the taller officer asked, his tone neutral but firm. "Yeah. What's this about?" "Someone reported that you're selling stolen designs. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" My mouth went dry. Macy had gone too far. I showed them all my records, timestamps, original files, client communications, and after half an hour, they nodded, satisfied. "Sorry for the trouble," the officer sighed, shaking his head as they left. "Looks like someone wanted to cause you problems." Furious and shaken, I immediately called my grandfather. He listened quietly, then said calmly, "I know someone who can help with this. Leave it to me." Within days, his friend, a retired private investigator named Frank, traced the fake report straight back to Bryce. The messages between Macy and Bryce showed her manipulating him, encouraging the fake accusations. She'd even joked, "Austin needs a taste of his own medicine." I pressed charges without hesitation. Watching Bryce panic and try to shift blame entirely onto Macy was almost satisfying, but truthfully, it made me feel exhausted. I was tired of the endless attacks, the lies, and the drama. I just wanted peace. After the whole mess died down, I threw myself into my work again. But one morning, as I walked into my studio, something felt off. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside slowly, heart racing. Papers were scattered everywhere, chairs flipped, screens shattered. My workspace, my sanctuary, was completely wrecked. I turned slowly, noticing the whiteboard across the room. In bold black marker, someone had written, "Now or even, Austin." I stared at the words, hands shaking. The voice in my head whispered, "She wouldn't." But security footage quickly confirmed what I already suspected. Macy, hoodie pulled low over her eyes, calmly vandalizing my studio, deliberately destroying my equipment before walking straight out the front door. This wasn't petty drama anymore. This was personal. As I stood in the mess, numb and furious, a sharp memory flashed in my mind. Macy ripping down my posters, smirking as she erased my childhood. She'd been doing this since the start, trying to take everything that mattered. But this time, she'd crossed the line. This time, I wasn't backing down. I picked up my phone, hands shaking, dialing the police immediately. Enough was enough. The police arrived quickly, taking photos and carefully going through the studio. As they questioned me, I tried to keep it together, but inside I was seething. This wasn't just theft. It felt like Macy had violated something deeper, something I'd spent years building from scratch. After the officers left, I stayed behind, alone in the quiet mess. I bent down, picking up scattered sketches, crumpled and torn on the floor. Each damaged design was another reminder of everything she'd taken from me. My mind flashed back to the moment Rick stood over me, telling me to pack my things. That same hollow feeling crept into my chest again, the familiar ache of being helpless, of not being believed. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't that scared kid anymore. A few days later, I got a call. Macy had been arrested, charged with vandalism, theft, and breaking and entering. For the first time ever, I heard the fear in her voice when her lawyer called, suggesting we handle things privately. "No," I said flatly. "She's had enough chances." But as I hung up, my hand shook slightly. Was it finally over? Weeks went by. Slowly, I rebuilt my studio, new locks, a better security system. Things seemed quiet again, almost peaceful. I convinced myself that Macy was finally out of my life for good. Then Grandpa called, inviting me over for dinner. He sounded oddly serious on the phone, and as we ate, I noticed he barely touched his food. Eventually, he cleared his throat, hesitated, then finally spoke. "Austin, there's something you need to know. Something your mother never wanted you to find out." I tensed immediately. "What is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Before your dad died, he invested money into Rick's company. A lot of money. He left shares specifically for you to secure your future. Your mom kept it quiet all these years, probably Rick's idea." My fork clattered onto the plate. My head spun. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Grandpa shook his head, looking regretful. "I didn't know until recently." "I'm sorry, Austin. If I'd known earlier, I would have done something." My hands trembled as I processed the truth. Rick hadn't just bullied me, he'd stolen from me. And my mother had allowed it. She'd chosen him and Macy over me, time after time, knowing exactly what she was doing. For a moment, my vision blurred with anger, but beneath it, hurt surged up sharply. Dad had tried so hard to look out for me, even after death. And Mom had betrayed both of us. That night, sitting alone in my small apartment, I stared at the paperwork Grandpa gave me. Dad's careful signature was at the bottom, and my chest tightened with longing. I could almost hear his voice, warm and reassuring. "Austin, you're going to build great things." I clenched the papers tightly, deciding what to do next. It didn't take long. Within days, I sold every share I owned to Rick's biggest rival. News traveled fast. Rick's company collapsed almost overnight, drowning in debt. Macy lost everything she had relied on. And suddenly, my phone lit up with another message from Mom. I hesitated before opening it, heart pounding uneasily. "Austin, please talk to me. You've ruined us. I know I made mistakes, but we're family. I need your help." My fingers hovered, shaking. I could almost picture her face, scared, lost, desperate. But behind it, I saw the woman who watched silently as I was kicked out onto the street, the one who stood by Rick as he blamed me for everything. I typed slowly, feeling the weight of each word. "You had years to be my family, Mom. Years. You made your choice." Before I could overthink, I hit send, immediately blocking her number again. This time, the silence felt permanent. Leaning back, I let out a long breath. My chest felt tight, but oddly lighter. I remembered Dad's voice again, calm and steady. "Someday, you'll build something amazing." He believed in me. Grandpa believed in me. And finally, I was starting to believe it myself. Months passed, and for the first time in years, my life felt steady. Macy faded from my thoughts, Rick disappeared completely, and my mom finally went silent. My little design studio grew into something bigger, busier. I hired my first employee, got some bigger clients, and even started mentoring other kids who'd been through tough situations like mine. Grandpa often stopped by, usually without warning, carrying coffee and a box of donuts from the bakery down the street. He'd sit quietly, watching me work, nodding his head proudly every time a client called to thank me or asked for a new project. One evening, as we sat together, he handed me a small envelope. "Found this the other day in an old drawer. Thought you might want it." Inside was a faded photograph, me and my dad working together on that same old airplane model, glue covering our fingertips. My face lit up with laughter. Dad was smiling at me, pride radiating from his eyes. A sudden ache caught in my chest. "God, I missed him. You look just like him. You know," Grandpa said quietly, glancing at the photo in my hands. "And not just in looks. He had that same stubborn determination, never gave up on anything he cared about." I swallowed hard, blinking quickly. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Grandpa placed a steady hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Austin, he'd be so damn proud. You have no idea." That night, alone in my apartment, I placed the photo carefully on my desk, right beside my monitor. From then on, I'd glance at it every morning, a small reminder of why I was doing all this, of who inspired me to keep pushing forward. Life moved on quickly. My small freelance projects turned into steady contracts, and soon I was hiring help. People I trusted, people who respected what I'd built. For the first time ever, I realized that family wasn't about blood. It was the people who chose you back, over and over, without hesitation. Then one afternoon, just as I was locking up my studio, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number this time. Hesitantly, I answered. "Austin." It was my mom's voice, quiet, tired, hesitant. My throat tightened instantly. What is it? She took a shaky breath, her voice strained. I need help. Rick left. Macy's in trouble. We have nothing left, nowhere to go. I stayed quiet, listening to her uneven breathing, feeling an old anger rise in me, alongside an unexpected sadness. I pictured her face the night I left, blank and silent as Rick threw me out. But then another memory flashed, her laughing, long before Rick, dancing with Dad in our kitchen while old music played from the radio. She'd once been a different person, someone who cared. Austin, please, she whispered, breaking my thoughts. I'm sorry I made mistakes. I felt tears sting my eyes, but forced them back. Mom, I began, my voice barely steady. Those weren't mistakes. You made choices. Every day you let Rick and Macy hurt me, you made a choice. She was quiet a long moment. I don't expect you to forgive me, but you're all I have left. I paused, my heart heavy. Finally, I sighed, the words painful but necessary. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't help you this time. She said nothing. Silence filled the line, stretching painfully until I quietly ended the call. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the phone, taking a slow breath. I expected guilt, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a quiet, heavy peace. I'd finally stood up for myself, finally chosen my own well-being over theirs. Weeks later, I heard Mom and Macy moved away, trying to start over somewhere new. Rick vanished completely. Grandpa told me gently, they made their bed, Austin. This isn't your burden anymore. And he was right. Life kept moving forward, brighter than I ever imagined. My business flourished, my friendships strengthened, and the painful past faded more each day. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely is, but it was mine. I built something Dad would have been proud of. Standing alone one night in my studio, surrounded by sketches and half-built designs, I glanced at Dad's photograph again. I smiled softly, finally believing the words he'd once said to me. You'll build something amazing, Austin. And he was right. I had.